After listening to the news about the attack at Pearl Harbor and digesting it, uh, it seemed like we would soon be going into the World War, and all eligible young men would be drafted into the Army or Armed Forces or else volunteer. And I started thinking about what I should do. And one of the things that was in my mind, on my mind, was the fact that my herniated disc would bother me occasionally, and I thought that being in the Army and having to go through basic training and then slogging through uh, terrible areas and carrying a backpack and guns would not be something that I could do. So I started thinking about what would be best for me, and I heard that the Signal Corps, which was part of the Army, was inviting people to join up and go to school to learn how to be smart enough or know enough to work at U.S. plants that were manufacturing radio receivers and transmitters for tanks. And I didn't know if that would be draft deferred or not, but I assumed that it would give me some standing as far as not going into the regular Army. So I went down to downtown New York, where people were tested physically for this and applied for the job. And I signed up to go into the Signal Corps with the understanding that this was a 6-month training program, and then you would go to work for the Signal Corps. So I was accepted, and the first thing I heard was that I would be sent to a school for young men in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to take the first part of this training course. And that was a school for boys or young men who were having difficulty in life. They didn't have a place to live. It was like a boarding school for young men that needed a home. And they were using this school for these boys from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. And the Signal Corps would then use these facilities from 3 in the afternoon till 11 at night. And that was the start of this program. It was fairly comfortable quarters. I mean, nothing luxurious, but clean. And I found out quickly that the program consisted in learning the basic ideas of what made radio work and transmitter work, and then to graduate, we would have to make our own supraheterodyne radio. Well, that sounded very difficult, and but I was in it, so I figured I'd do it. And we went to school starting at 3 in the afternoon and working till 11, and we were doing that, I think, for 6 days a week with 1 day off. I found that the schoolwork was kind of interesting. I had never been considered myself very handy in building stuff, and I was wondering whether I would be able to make this radio. When they say make the radio, they mean they gave you pieces of metal, and you had to build the box that the radio would go in and assemble all the parts and solder the connections, and the final test was that the radio had to work. So, and that was going to take 3 months. Anyway, I found living in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where the school was located, to be very pretty countryside and very pleasant, and the people unusual. Many of them were Amish and wore old-fashioned clothing when in the streets, and didn't drive cars but drove buggies. And I found it was interesting that when you bought something and you gave them dollar bills, the change you got was often the wrong change, but rarely too little. It seemed like they always gave you too much change. And that was a very peculiar thing. Anyway, one of the problems was in this school, the food was not great. It was, I don't know how to say this, but it was plain and very ordinary, and it seemed to me not to have the proper ingredients for a healthy diet. For instance, instead of salad, they would give you some kind of jello. The bread was white bread. And I was used to whole wheat or something that could give some nutrition. So anyway, we students who had not the boys who lived there, but we 3 to 11 students decided to protest, or at least ask if they could make some changes that wouldn't cost them anything but would be more nutritious. And we asked about getting fresh salad instead of gelatin, getting whole wheat bread instead of white bread, and little things like that that we thought would make our life better since we were going to be there for 3 months. I remember one occasion that we were missing, a lot of us were from New York City, and we were used to, once in a while, having chopped vegetables and sour cream as a dish. And we were missing that. So we were in the habit, when school ended at 11 p.m., to go to a nearby diner and have ham and eggs or bacon and eggs, because we were hungry after our meals of the day. And we looked forward to that. And we enjoyed it, but it got to be a little dull having the same thing in the evening at 11 o'clock. So we asked the proprietor if he could chop up some fresh vegetables, and we told him what we'd want in it, and have some sour cream that we could put on top of it, and have that instead of the usual ham and eggs. Anyway, so one of the following evenings when we went there at 11 o'clock, we found that he had chopped up the vegetables that we asked for and provided a quart bottle of sour cream for each of us. We hadn't specified how much of the sour cream that we would use, so he thought a quart bottle would be okay for us. Remember that we were, at this time, 20-year-old young men, probably still growing a little, but obviously always very hungry. So that was a memorable thing that happened. I remember in Lancaster that if you wanted to go out for dinner, which we did on our day off, a full dinner, a three-course dinner with dessert and coffee, at that time would cost about 80 cents. Food was unbelievably good and inexpensive, so we enjoyed ourselves that way. Anyway, 3 months went by pretty quickly, and it was time for the big test. Would our radios work when we got them all soldered up and put together? And frankly, they did. I think everybody's worked. The teachers were evidently good enough for us, and there we had our own super heterodyne radio. During this 3-month period, my relationship with Babe had become more close, and we were considered kind of engaged, or not formally, but at least she was my steady girlfriend. And once or twice during the 3 months, I took a train from Lancaster to Philadelphia, which was about an hour's trip, and then changed from to get on a train that went from Philadelphia to New York, which was probably 2 hours, and then up to the Bronx where Babe was living, and spent the day with her, and then the next day, my day off, I would reverse that trip and go back. It was very tiring, but obviously worthwhile for both of us. Anyway, at the end of the 3 months, the next part of this program was to go to Cornell University in Ithaca and take more advanced training in the theory of how radios worked and what you should do in the inspection of them. And to do this, we were sent to Cornell University and told that we would take 2 years worth of electrical engineering and complete that in 3 months by going to the electrical engineering school for 6 days a week and 8 hours a day, doing nothing but electrical engineering work and forgetting all the other courses that you would be taking if you were actually going to Cornell. Anyway, they had arranged apartments for us and put with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a bathroom, and with two of us to each of these apartments. This was now April or May, and Cornell University was being shut down for the summertime, so they had plenty of room for us in the electrical engineering school. It was a beautiful place to visit at that time of the year, and the apartments that we got were at the top of the hill, going and with a short walk of maybe a few hundred yards to get into the campus and get to the school to the particular building that we were using of the college. And I found that actually thrilling because in the morning the bells in the bell tower would ring as we were walking up to school, which was about 7:45 in the morning, and the weather was more beautiful, and I couldn't think of a nicer way to serve my country and joining the Signal Corps. At any rate, we had gone from this bare school in Lancaster, where everything was just hands-on, to this school where there was nothing hands-on and it was all intellectual. I remember one day that the professor was going to explain to us how a condenser worked in a radio, and what was its purpose. And he said, but I really can't explain this to you without the use of calculus. And he said, how many of you students have had calculus? And about 2 or 3 out of 50 raised their hands. I had had calculus already, so I was one of those that raised their hands. But then he proceeded in 2 days to teach the rest of us calculus so that we would better understand the workings of a condenser. That's the way this program went. It was very thorough, very deep, and very fast. I mean, if you can try to teach somebody calculus in 2 days, then you can imagine how fast the rest of the subjects were to have us get a better understanding of the kind of work we would do. Anyway, I spent 3 delightful months at Cornell, and Babe and her mother and father drove up one weekend. We had 1 day off because we were going to school 6 days a week. I guess it was Sunday off. So they came up on a Saturday and spent Sunday there. And they got housing in the building where up on the campus where the bell tower was. On the second floor of this building, there were a few sleeping rooms, and they had the advantage of using it. So that was a quick visit, and but everything was quick in those days. And the 3 months went by very rapidly, and I graduated from this program to teach us enough to go into factories where they were where they were making these radios, transmitters, and receivers that would go into tanks. And the plant I was sent to work in was back in Philadelphia. So I moved to Philadelphia, got a small apartment, and started my work as an inspector for the Signal Corps. I lasted at that probably for only a month. I found that the work was very boring. It was lonely living in Philadelphia without knowing a soul, and being far away from Babe at that time didn't seem to me like the right thing to do. So I told them that I was quitting, and I wasn't signed up in the Signal Corps. I was a civilian employee of the Signal Corps, so I had the right to leave. And that put me back in New York, again thinking about what do I do now. I want to avoid the draft, and I didn't want to go into the Army, but I still wanted to serve honorably. After a month or 2, I heard about a course that was being, well, let's say, the U.S. Navy was looking for people who knew something about radio, who had done some work in making radios, fixing radios, but anyway, had some experience with radios. And they were offering incentives for these people to join the Navy. And if they joined, and if they proved their competency in their knowledge of some knowledge of radio, they would be offered inducements to join and go to school to take an 11-month program to learn how to service radar equipment. Well, first of all, I had never heard of radar. I thought they misspelled radio. But it sounded like a pretty good deal to me. I could learn more, be of service, and avoid the problems that might occur with if I went into any other service and had to do basic training. The inducement that the Navy was offering people to join was, if you really know something about radio and you take our test, which was called the Eddy test, that was devised by a captain in the Navy, which is a very high position next to admiral. Next step is admiral. Anyway, if you got a good grade there, you could join the Navy. You didn't have to go to boot camp, and you could go in as a seaman first, a petty officer third class, or a petty officer second class. And a petty officer second class was the equivalent of a staff sergeant in the Army. And you didn't have to go to boot camp, which to me, that's the 90-day preparation for service. And I didn't think that my back would handle that. So I thought that, gee, this sounds like a good idea. And I went down to downtown New York, Whitehall Street, I think is where it was. And I took this test. In a couple of weeks, I got a mail from the Navy saying, congratulations, you scored very high, and we would like to have you join the Navy, and you can come in as a second-class petty officer, which was the highest thing available then. And we will send you to school for 11 months, at the end of which time you'll be qualified to service radar equipment. So I thought this was a pretty good deal, and I went down. Oh, but I had to pass a physical first. So I looked physically fit, and my problem with my disc didn't show up. So I went through the physical fine, and when they said, is there anything wrong with you that you know of? And I said, no. So I passed, and I was in the Navy. This was I think, in November of 1942. And I had a week or two to get ready, and was told when I should go down to be inducted and receive my Navy clothing, which I was surprised. They get provided underwear, socks, white uniforms, blue uniforms, and a sea bag to put all of it in. And in addition to that, a hammock to place the sea bag in. I was kind of surprised to think that the Navy was still using hammocks for you to sleep in. I didn't think my back would handle that. But I took what they gave me and carried it out, and was told to I would get orders about where to report. And I thought, well, I don't know, it could be anywhere from Okinawa. No, I mean, it could be any place in the world. But when I got my orders in the mail, it told me to go to Pier 6 on Staten Island, which was a subway ride and a ferry ride across the New York Harbor to Staten Island. And I was to wait there until my position of school to go to take this radar program would be available to me. When that happened, and my destination and life seemed to be set, at least for the next year, Babe and I decided to become engaged. And we thought that it would make sense for us to wait until the war was over, in maybe a year or two, and then we could think about getting married. So I think I waited a week or two to report to Pier 6 in Staten Island, and arrived there to find that there was a bed waiting for me on a pier, and there were 2,000 other sailors going to sleep on that pier, and we were given a place to store our belongings and make up our beds. And we were told that we would be given some duties to perform while we waited for notice about when we would go to class. So in the meantime, I spoke to a few people that had been staying on the pier to find out about what was the best position to get to work in while waiting to go to school. And I was told that the kitchen wasn't bad, but that would mostly be washing dishes, and wasn't particularly desirable. But there was one position to guard the Swift refrigeration plant, which was about 2 miles away, still on Staten Island, but a place where they stored meat products that Swift had made in this refrigeration plant. And the advantage of working there was that you would get a pass to leave the base at any time, because you had to go to 2 miles to go to the Swift plant, and you would only work 3 days a week, and you didn't have to sleep on the base, which I thought, being a light sleeper, and I didn't look forward to sleeping in a room with 2,000 other guys, coughing, sneezing, snoring, because I tried to sleep there the first night, and I found it really impossible. So the next day, when we were going to be assigned to our duties, somebody asked, who wants to work in the Swift refrigeration plant? And I quickly raised my hand. So I was selected. I volunteered, which you're not supposed to do in the service, but this proved to be very, very good. And I was directed how to get to the Swift refrigeration plant, and found it and found the chief in charge, and was told that I would be working 3 8-hour days or nights, and the rest of the time I was free. And living in New York, an hour away from this plant, that meant I could go home and sleep home, and only go into the base when I had my 3 8-hour periods of duty. Sometimes they were from during the day, and other times they were from 12 midnight to 8 in the morning, but I didn't really care. I'm only there waiting to go to school. But that's the next problem. How would I know when I was slated to go to school? What would happen was, when the time came for you to go, they would post your name up on a bulletin board and say where and when you should report. But if I wasn't on the base, I couldn't see the bulletin board. So I had to get somebody who agreed to look. He was also looking at the bulletin board for himself, and he would look for me and would call me when my name showed up. Well, I was kind of amazed that when I asked how long people had been waiting to go to school, and I was told it was as long as 2 or 3 months. So I said, okay, at least I'm in a pretty good position here. I can go home to sleep, come into work, and be available when my name was called. One day, when I came into work, I made a stop to see what was going on the pier before I went to my job at the Swift plant, and the place stunk, and the smell was from diarrhea, and there had been 2,000 men on this base, and they all got diarrhea. what happened was there was something went wrong with the food, and everybody who ate there that night got diarrhea and tried to go to the bathroom, but what they found was all the seats were taken, and so they just did their duty on the floor, and then people couldn't walk into the bathroom because it was covered with shit. So they started defecating into barrels, waste barrels on the pier, and then finally any place they could. A couple of the guys this was in December, I think, and a couple of guys went outdoors and tried to sit on the edge of the pier and shit into the river. I don't know how that worked out. But anyway, I was very glad that I was eating at home and hadn't gone through that terrible ordeal. Anyway, around this time, we found out that Babe's father, who at the time was 47 years old, had developed colon cancer. And in those days, which was 1942, that was inoperable, and he was given 6 months to live. And that seemed a cruel fate for a young man whose life up to that time had been pretty good. Babe was an only child, and when we talked about it, we came to the conclusion that he would go to his death with a little more ease if he knew that his only child was safely married off and that he could be present at her wedding. So we decided that we would get married as soon as we could and as soon as it could be arranged. And one way to do it, I didn't have anything to do with it, but Babe and the mother arranged for us to be married at the Astor Hotel, which was on 44th Street and Broadway, and was famous for the clock in the lobby where people used to meet. It was a famous saying to meet you under the clock at the Astor. But this was December, maybe the beginning of December or the end of November, and they arranged for us to be married on January 9th of 1943, which was probably 6 weeks away. And they were able to do it, and I was still at Staten Island, thankfully, when the big date came, and you can see some of the pictures that were taken of Babe and her mother and father and me in my tailor-made sailor suit, getting married at the Astor.